Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you books that helped get me through the pandemic. So even though we're still kind of experiencing the pandemic, we're not at the extent that we were at the beginning of it, nor are we having the number of cases, particularly in the United States, that we had around like November to like February. So we're kind of almost out of the woods. So I think this is like a good way to really reflect on this past year and a half. And definitely when I was looking at the books that I started reading since March 2020, I can just think about how many of them have kind of helped provide either some distraction or just, provided me with an escape from the problems that we were going on with the world as of this past year. So yeah, these are books that for one reason or another have kind of helped me get through the pandemic. So this is the book that really kind of kicked it off because me and my friend read it right when everything shut down. Like literally when the world shut down, that's when we picked up this book. And it is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. And so because I read this with my friend and she lives on the other side of the country, so our book club has always been virtual, so I guess we were ahead of the times, but we honestly flew through this like 800-page book like within a week. We were reading 100 pages every day, meeting every day, and just having that social interaction was really helpful. And it provided me, like when everything was shutting down, like we had this to kind of lose ourselves in. And I think that's something really special. Like I know this book has a lot of criticism, especially with all Sarah J. Maas books, and I do recognize the flaws in them, but there is something about just kind of completely losing yourself in that book, providing me with that distraction when everyone was scared. Like I was scared of my dad going to the grocery store. We like wiped everything down, like just that kind of fear that everyone had because no one really knew what kind of COVID was at that point. So it was scary, and having this book to kind of get me through that initial like week and a half where everything like hit the fan, I think is really special. And it provided me with, like I said, social interaction with talking to my friend and having like that social connection that we kind of lost with the pandemic. So being able to maintain something that was already virtual in the first place and providing that distraction, I think is really special. So these are two books that I read throughout this past year and a half, and they are part of like the same trilogy, and it is Lost Roses and Sunflower Sisters by Martha Hall Kelly. So this trilogy follows a family that was very prominent throughout American history. So in the first book we follow Caroline and her contributions to the war efforts during World War II. We follow Caroline's mother Eliza and her contribution to World War I, and then we follow Georgie, who is Eliza's aunt during the Civil War. So these are based off of real women. It's basically a fictionalized story based on these women, but I think it shows the resilience of the human spirit, and just having people not necessarily go through like a pandemic, but go through times of hardship, and seeing ways that people have overcome it, I think is really important. And especially because of these major world events happened like on a global scale, and so that's another thing with the pandemic. Like everyone was going through the same thing at the same time, and even though it's a little bit different than kind of war, I feel like that global aspect of it I think is still pretty uniform. So just kind of following these women and their resilience during this difficult time was really inspiring. And like I said, there was just something about this writing style too that I would just lose myself in. I'd be reading and be like, oh my gosh, I already read 50 pages. Like that's how engrossed I was with the stories. Next up, I have the Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. I read like maybe the first 3 prior to the pandemic, and I read 4 through 16, and then the 17th book comes out in August, which will still be in a pandemic by then. But I've literally read like so many of these books throughout the course of the pandemic, and I honestly love this series. You guys are probably sick of me talking about it, but it provided me with an escape for sure. I think especially too because this takes place in Canada, I feel like it reminded me of home, and especially when I was reading this series over Christmas, because this was the first time in my entire life that I was not able to spend Christmas in Canada with my family. And so it kind of helped with that hollow feeling that I had, because I was able to like have this this sounds so weird, but I was able to like have Christmas with my family with these characters in the book, and just that sense of love and family that these characters have, I think was able to kind of, I was able to lose myself in these characters to kind of have the feelings of Christmas that I would normally have, the sense of like warmth and family and love and all those things that we just weren't able to have with the pandemic. So that sounds really crazy, but like I said, I honestly read so much of this series throughout the pandemic, and because of that, I think this series is like near and dear to my heart because of how much I was able to lose myself in this world and these characters and all those things. So yeah, this is definitely my favorite crime series of all time. So in regards to the, you know, resilience of the human spirit, I would have to include The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. And I read this right around the time that my parents tested positive for COVID, and that was a very scary time. And for some reason, me and my siblings got tested throughout the whole thing, and we were negative, but both my parents had COVID, and it was scary. It was stressful. You don't know how your body's gonna react to it. Luckily their cases were very mild, but just kind of having to kind of go through that experience is scary. And I think that kind of fear, I feel like, is manifested in The Four Winds. It's very much reflected in what these characters have to go through, even though it is slightly different. We follow Eliza in her story of survival with her family trying to just kind of survive during not only the Great Depression, but also the Dust Bowl era as well. And just seeing again the hardships that they had to go through, their resilience, and especially with Eliza, finding her voice and finding her bravery was really inspirational. And even though this book gave me so much anxiety, like, I was just really invested in their story. And again, this provided me with a distraction, and I was able to relate with the characters, even though it wasn't very similar in terms of what we were going through. That same kind of fear of the unknown was very relevant, and I could relate to these characters and their situation. And I think especially, I feel like there's something very powerful about books that not only show the resilience of human, but also really tap into the human spirit and just kind of our resilience to everything, I think is really powerful. And lastly, I have to include this one, and this was one of my most anticipated releases of 2021, and I was so excited for this one, and it was The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. This one I think came out in like March of this year, and I honestly was gripped from the beginning, and I think I have a really strong connection to this author's work. In particular, I read The Alice Network right after my grandmother passed away, and it provided me with a distraction during a very difficult time in my life. And so I feel like this book kind of did the same thing here, where it provided me with a distraction from what was going on within the outside world and just that stress that has come with the pandemic. And so again, I could see the resilience in these characters here having to live in the UK when they're being bombed by Germans during World War II, and just that resilience, and just these women working really hard to crack the codes and become part of like the Enigma codes, and all that stuff was really inspiring. So again, even though it was very different situations, I could relate to the resilience of kind of having to live in this situation. So like I said, I was really much looking forward to this. And there's something, actually I'm trying to think, yeah, The Huntress, which was Kate Quinn's second book, came out during another difficult time in my life, and then this one came out during the pandemic. So there's something about Kate Quinn's books that kind of correlate to major life events for me, and I'm happy that I've relied on these books to kind of provide me with an escape and distraction. that's it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what some of the books that helped you through the pandemic were, or even just like media, like TV shows, music, like all those things. Like, did you find like relief and kind of a distraction in the stories of Taylor Swift's Folklore, or did you just kind of binge watch The Office over and over and over again? Like, I think those, like, there is power in media and in books that can provide us with escapes, and we can lose ourselves in different worlds, and I think there's something really powerful about that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.